All right, ready to get started? I'll be a little late. Blame that on me. Fairhope Docks Rules and Regulations, License and Lease Agreements for Dockage Space. Ms. Mason?
Okay, we'll keep it real short. A couple of weeks ago, I sent all of you a draft copy and sent it to Tut as well in terms of rules, regs, and leases, and Tut did get back to me with some additions and a couple of changes, not many, which I can go over real quick. He added that the rules and regulations are incorporated into the lease agreement and by this reference made an enforceable part of the lease. On point number 7, we are at rules and regs, sorry. At point number 7, he added sewage, and he changed on number 21, he changed Fairhope Dicks to Fairhope Docks. That was a typo. Those were the only changes made to the rules and regs. The two agreements, the one for commercial fishing vessels and the other one for regular dockage space for lease and license, Tuck added, this lease shall continue in effect from month to month, subject to termination on 30 days written notice by either party to the other. These changes are the same in both of those leases. On page 2, the second full paragraph, he added the marina, last sentence, marina reserves the right to alter or amend the terms and conditions of this lease and license from time to time by 1, written notice to the boat owner, and 2, prominent publication by notice on the marina grounds. Page 3, with a paragraph beginning no modifications, he added approved by the city council. And then he added a very smart sentence in that the boat owner acknowledges that he or she has inspected the leased berthing space and is satisfied that the berthing space is adequate for safe mooring of the vessel. And that's it. The only other question I have is that with all of these lease and licenses that we compared and derived these documents, they all asked for Social Security. And I'm not sure that that's something we need. It is something I would prefer to take out at any point where it is listed. We have a card security number, but where Social Security is requested, I think that's something that we need to relook and maybe ask for driver's license as an ID. But that's basically where we are, and with these would go in effect October 15th.
Several questions for you.
Yep.
Item 20, present certificate of liability insurance. Is that the only insurance that's required? And should we have the Fairhope Docks listed as secondary?
Are you on the rules and regs? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Most certainly we should have Fairhope Docks as secondary. And this particular, the certificate of liability was the only insurance I could find in any of the other leases that I looked at.
I would think that we need to have that language maybe spiffed up a little bit.
Okay.
Item 11 says no swimming, diving, or fishing shall be permitted in the marina. It's not uncommon for people to throw a cast net in a marina to try to catch some bait before they go fishing. I can't see us not allowing that in a marina. That's a form of fishing, and I see people that sometimes stay on their boats, fish off the side of the boats. I don't really see a problem with that either. Anybody have a problem with that? I mean,
okay.
Do you want to say fishing shall be allowed by slip renters only, maybe, if you're trying to keep the general public out from making it a public fishing spot? But I don't really see that as an issue if we wanted to narrow it down. But
By slip holders?
I just know that people, you know, it's a good place to catch bait. We don't want to keep people from catching bait before they go fishing.
I'm just wondering if they are fishing, though, would that block people coming in and out of Fly Creek with their lines? I mean, if they're going to catch bait, they usually do it when they get out.
Okay. I don't see it as an issue. I mean, I said I spent a lot of time on the water, and in docks. And, you know, I kind of picture my son, he fishes in the evening, he catches croakers or whatever, and it's just kind of fun. And I've never seen it. I've seen boats come and go, never seen it be, man, I've just never seen it be an issue. I think it's too restrictive.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. I'll just delete, we'll leave 11 to read, swimming and diving shall not be permitted in the marina.
Well, we can revisit that in the future if it ever became an issue, which I
Sure.
could never see, but I would try to allow it. There's one other. I have a little concern about on item 9, the 10 slips for commercial fishing vessels. You know, I think I'd rather see it, you know, closer to 15. Do you know how many we have down there right now?
9. And one so far not renewed.
And it says no fewer than 10. I'd still like to see that preserved a little more. You know, I think that out of 30 over there on that side, you know, 15, should we get lucky enough to get 5 more commercial fishermen in there, or 6 more, that's a more reasonable number. You can still use them for transient slips if they're not being used. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I was just going to be my point was if we were going to leave them vacant, just with the hopes that somebody would fill them, that would be not maximizing that.
It's not. That is the risk you run with only 9 being used. You would have 6 being unused except for transient.
Leave it 10. If the fishing industry starts taking off in Fairhope, we'll address it then.
How about 12 as a compromise? Well, I just hate to see it only be able to creep up by one. I'm telling you, that's a really big deal to people down there. It's one of the reasons that people resisted the city taking it over. If people want to keep that. People want to keep that a viable commercial fishing dock. And
I don't have an issue doing 15, but just noting that those are going to be available for the transient spots, that makes sense to me.
The thing about using the word minimum, and 12 is
Yeah,
probably a good
target.
compromise. That doesn't mean that's all you have available.
right, you may get 20 in there.
You may get 20 in the end,
First come,
in which,
first served,
yeah,
but-
in which case, but you're talking a minimum available, which we would make available for transients, yes, when they're empty, but that doesn't mean you are limited to 10.
But if you fill it up with recreational vessels, then you can't get. Then the commercial fisherman is left out. And you know, I think that that's one of the concerns of the Harbor Board, and it's one of the concerns of the people that's, you know, been down there for a long time. I know times have changed. It's not necessarily going to be more than 9, but I fear that 10 may be too little. I'd beg y'all to consider 12.
Okay?
Would y'all consider that?
I got no issue with 12.
And then adjust in a year or two if it dwindles down. If it does, it dwindles down, we can adjust, but I don't think that's too much to give up down there.
Good question. Shall we be defining what commercial fisherman is in this case?
Well, you have it there in 10A.
Yes, thank you. And that's
straight out of our ordinance.
That's straight out of our, yes.
Right.
That's straight out of what exists today.
And if we really stick to that definition, we should be good. Anybody else see anything else? That's what I've seen going over it a couple of times.
What are the punishments for violating these terms? I mean, just looking at one about hanging laundry on your boat. What happens if you hang your laundry on your boat?
You have to walk the plank.
I mean, we're making rules. We need to make.
The consequences?
Correct.
I would imagine that there's a warning system after which you are asked to leave the marina.
Yeah, I mean, a warning, maybe then a fine, then after 2 fines, then you're handed to papers.
Asked to depart.
Chuck, what's that catch-all we use for municipal court? If somebody's in violation of one of our rules like that, it's up to the judge, and, you know, there's a minimum fine of whatever, $20 up to $500. We have kind of a catch-all.
There's usually it's from 0 to 500 on any municipal offense. Fine.
Would this be something that would go in front of the court, or is this?
Well, I don't know.
Would it be a crime? If it's not a crime, it's just a violation of a civil rule, it would not
Wouldn't
be
go
a
to
crime.
court.
Yeah, so we'd be responsible for putting our own.
That's why you're supposed to look them over.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
What would you recommend?
I would think something like what I said, which was, maybe a notice at first, maybe a citation, and if it's a repeat violation, then they get a fine, and if they do it again, the fine's a little bit heftier, and then if they do it more than 3 times, so they've gotten a notice and then 2 fines, the 4th time would be.
The lease says that the rules are incorporated, and so it would be a violation of the lease, and it could result in a eviction.
Yeah, so.
Violation of these rules could result in a fine not to exceed such and such or eviction? I don't know. Can you put that in there?
I don't know if you can do a fine, but you could, eviction is your real remedy for a violation of the rules of the lease, violation of the lease terms.
Give them one notice advising them that they face eviction and a second
Right.
offense?
Number 29 needs to be number 29 needs to be
At the bottom,
can you have that by the time our meeting starts?
What's that?
A number 29, a penalty clause?
I could probably do that.
could have as Tut just said, you get a warning. And the second time, and your warning is that you do it again, you're facing eviction. Real simple. Would you like me to incorporate these other changes before meeting?
Yes, please.
No problem. And I'll just wait for your legal words.
Sure.
29 penalty clause.
I'll call on Mr. Wynn to assist me, if you'll give Lynn some language about a penalty clause at the end of the rules. Otherwise engaged.
So number 9.
So number 9, we're changing to 12.
Number 9, number 11.
We're taking out
taking out
fishing, and I will add a sentence to that fishing shall be allowed by slip holders only.
Okay.
How many commercial boats do we have down there right now?
9.
9.
Number 20.
Number 20, vessels outside workers must present, and I would need the legalese for how the city of Fairhope is secondary on the insurance. It's appropriate verbiage. And then add 29.
Penalty clause.
Yeah, and just asking a follow-up on something, why would we need, just trying to think, why would we need someone's social security number in this boat slip? I mean, I think you're saying you'd like to take it off. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of what would be the reason we would need it. Do we do background checks on these people that rent slips? Do you need a social security number to get a background check, credit check?
You could probably get the same thing with a driver's license in terms of,
I think your typical lease does have a background check, and that's probably why it's in there. But I don't know if you need it for this.
Yeah, if we're running a credit check on people that are signing up for boat slips, and you probably do need it.
okay, whatever, your pleasure.
I mean, if we do, I mean, I don't know if we do or not, but it seems like.
Yeah, do we run a credit check, or do we have them pay in advance?
Slip leases are
monthly.
paid in advance.
Yeah, 1 month in advance, I
Mhm.
guess.
I would ask for a driver's license number or state ID if they don't have one. Surely they have one if they are operating a boat. A boater's license probably requires that, so. I don't know that we need a driver's. I'm trying to find it. Oh, there it is, owner's social security number, I see it.
And it has a driver's license.
I don't think we need that social security number on there. I wouldn't ask you for it. Anybody else have a thought on it?
I mean, anything in certain scenarios where you might want it,
For financial reasons?
no, background check.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to think of like.
Well, we can leave it there. If we get a lot of disgruntled responses to it, I'm not going to give you my Social Security. We can relook it, but
Yeah, that's, the mayor makes a good point. Is evicting someone from a boat slip the same process as evicting them from an apartment lease or something like that? Because you might need.
I hope not.
Be in there for a year.
Eviction would take a similar process.
So I think we probably need it
It'd be a commercial
then.
process, but
Yeah.
it's similar. You'd have to give notice of termination of tenancy and vacate, and request to vacate or demand to vacate, and then if that's not done, you have to file a unlawful detainer action in the district court.
Somebody do a background check.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think we should ask for
We're
it.
leaving it.
Yeah. Yes, social security number stays. Which means it's tough for us to use the threat of eviction,
Which,
but we can put,
You do that in the
we can put the threat
lease for an
there.
apartment.
yeah. Well, I mean, we've got a fee and a penalty in here for late payment, so I think we should be able to put a penalty in there for violation of the rules too. Maybe not monetary, but eviction.
Okay?
Did this allow, I'm still trying to find it again, did this allow people to live on their boats there?
We don't address liveaboards, and we do have them. That is a policy that we have not addressed yet.
Okay, so
And we've been taking the stance that, initially, we're not changing anything.
Right, well, that's why I was asking. So I didn't see it in there then.
Right.
Okay. Now, I have said that we weren't changing it. I've told people that we weren't changing it. I didn't want to eat my words or be a liar. Anybody see anything else? Nope. There's no price change.
No.
Price structure's the same, right?
We're staying the same. We are competitive, slightly below Fly Creek, and certainly once we get the marina improved, we're worth the current pricing.
Anybody else have anything else? Or the rules and regs or the lease agreements?
Okay?
Okay,
I'll go take care of the rules and regs and have copies for you before the meeting.
all right. Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, you going to lead the budget discussion?
Yes.
Okay. The budget book, just to kind of go through this to show you how it's a little bit different, is broken out a little different, but you have on the first tab kind of an overview. I wanted this printed on 11 by 17, but after it was printed, we're not going to reprint it, so hopefully you can see everything. But you'll see that my notes are included because I wanted to make sure that anything that looked like you might need an explanation is there. I'm not going to go through every single one of these during this presentation. But we added actuals for 2015, so you can see 3 years, 15, 16, and 17. It shows the budget reclassified utility and departmentalized expenses, because although we put in the original budget what we thought was most of the utility expenses, it wasn't all of them. We continue to find things, well, we can do this here because it's definitely a utility expense. And in the case of revenue, for example, revenue includes meter and revenue. Meter, though, needs to be an expense of utilities. So now revenue is broken out more. Meter department as a whole is going to utilities, which is an expense the city won't have to pay. And, all that personnel and all those expenses will go under there. But that's why that column is there. The actual is kind of highlighted, and then the mayor budget for 2008 is highlighted. you'll see right by the actual 2017 a column that says department requests. This is the total amount each department had presented that they, their needs, not all of them presented revenue necessarily, but for the expenses, with every presentation you heard over the last couple of months, that's what that column includes. And then the edits are the next column before the budget 2018. Now, this is just an overview. It goes into a lot more detail as you get into the departments. I included most of the slides that are going to be in this presentation. Some of them I edited today that are not going to be in here, but I can give you. As in the previous budget books, you'll have revenue and transfers in the next tab. General government. General government here, the way this is going to be different than what you've seen in the past, but is that we are departmentalizing everything that goes under government has its own department now, which includes expenses and revenue if they have, not every department has revenue. And then we kept the general government still as a tab. Again, notes on every single one of them.
What tab are you on there?
That was for general government.
Is that tab 2 still?
It's tab 2. So I guess revenue and expenses.
Revenue and expenses is 2.
It is 2? Okay, so we have to change that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's right. General government revenues and expenses.
And then where's general government? Okay. So this is a little different than the tabs on the bottom from our Excel. Okay. Under operations, I mean, you can look at every department, but under operations, it's all utilities, including the meter department. Then we have appropriation and transfers separated out so you can see where the different appropriations are going. The supporting documents, the reorganization, that's just the organizational chart. Capital purchases, Jill talked me into keeping those separate. I was going to put those under the different departments, but they really do need to be separate so you can see all of them. So I'm going to go into the presentation. Just wanted to give you the layout of the book. Okay. Let me see if I have anything in here. Okay, one of the things I want to explain in this budget is the big thing that we accomplished in 2017 was separating out most of the utility subsidy to the city. The utility subsidy to the city came in 2 ways. One, there was just a lot of operating expenses, city operating, that were just paid in utilities. They were part of their financials. And then the second way was through transfers. So with this budget for 17, 18, and future years, you're just going to see one transfer from utilities. And that's what we want to try to manage. So on the first screen, we have the total amount of the utility subsidy. The transfers in one line, operating expenses paid from utility that were city expenses in the other line. And then you can see the total utility department paid, 2015, 16, and 17. And notice in 17 that, we are going to have a transfer right now because it's not like we can overnight fix that deficit, but we didn't have any operating expenses paid out of utilities. So that's I think something very significant that we were able to achieve in really just one short year. Also, you can see on the bottom, the actual transfer in 2017 should have been $1,817,567. we shouldn't transfer more into the city than is needed to show a surplus. And that's what we showed this year, is a surplus in the city. But I think we should only transfer from the utilities exactly what we need. See if there's any more notes. Okay, the next slide. So we substantially decreased the utility subsidy when you take out the amount for 2017 that really didn't need to be transferred to utilities. This is what you can see is the difference. Again, this is what we hope to manage in the future, because those expenses now will be under the city and we can manage them through the city. The next one. This is the actual deficit for the city before any transfers from the utility. In 2015, you can see it's over 6.6 million. In 2016, it was over 6.7 million. And in 2017, it's just under 2. So I wanted to show this just to say that where we might be before transfers, still at a deficit, it's significantly lower than where we were. So I think this is a very good trend. Next one. The city surplus, now this is kind of broken down into all of the transfers that happen with the city. In 2000, is that me? Sorry. And I'm turning it off. So we've got total revenue for the city, 2015, 16, and 17, total expenditures, and then impact fees and cash reserves. These are kind of together right now because sometimes impact fees are transferred to the operating or cash reserves. We're not sure if each line, except for 2017, the total amount, though, for cash reserves includes any impact fees. So you've got that separated out. Then you have the city operating paid out of utilities for 15 and 16, the utility transfer on the bottom, and then you can see that when you compare all like numbers, 2015, 16, and 17, the surplus and deficit, what you're going to see in your overall first tab, that we were at a deficit of 2.2 million in 2015, over 6 million in 2016, and of course in the black in 2017. Again, that $1 million probably should not have been transferred from utilities. The next one. Now this is just utilities reporting without transfers. So you can just see apples to apples. The total revenue is showed on the first line, the total expenses on the second line. The city operating expenses were added back in. This is not transfers, these are city operating expenses paid from utilities in 15 and 16, and of course none of that was paid in 17, and we are not putting that in the budget for 2018. And you can see the net income loss. It's very, very good. Now 2018 does include proposals for revenue increases, and that's all spelled out in the tabs in there. So, okay. That also is in your book with the notes there. So 2018 budget proposal. In 2017, we kind of concentrated more on the low-hanging fruit for expenses, and of course, spending time separating out the financials from the city and utilities. This 2018 budget, the focus is going to be on revenue opportunities, infrastructure, and personnel needs. And also I have I think, a sheet printed out for cash reserves because, well, I'll get to that a little bit later, but just evaluating cash reserves as it relates to what we're going to need for the rainy day fund and also what we should use, if any, when we're looking to borrow. Okay, personnel stats. As you can see on these statistics, in 2010, the total count for full-time employees was 281. In 2017, which we pulled last week, we were at 270. That net change, of course, is we're almost down 4% for total number of employees. And this has been a trend for some time, since long before I took office. It's been flat or down. The shortage that we need, it is a long-term problem. It's not going to happen overnight, filling in these needs. But this statistic is exasperated when you look at the growth, and the growth is almost 27% when you're looking at the same years. On the bottom, the other statistic I wanted you to look at was we totaled the percentage of increases when you take into consideration the cost of living and the merits. And well, actually, I don't think that includes promotions, or did it? This one right here.
I don't think so.
Okay. This was just cost of living and merits. Promotions we have broken out separately in this budget book because that's not really, you can't take that out of a pot of a percentage because some people are going to a different job. Does that make sense? We're just strictly showing cost of living and merit increases. And when you total that in 2014, it was 4%. 2015 was 3%. 2016, 4%. 2017 was 2%. We're proposing this year 2%, but it will be on merit. And this would be given on their anniversary so that time can be spent and it's spread out throughout the whole year. And by not giving all of the merits right when the budget passes, you know, you're not looking at that expense for the whole year, although in this budget, the expense is, it's expensed for the whole year. So these promotions, not promotions, but the merit increases will be handled by the department heads, and it would be a pot of money that would net 2%. In other words, you're going to be giving those who have really done well a little bit more than that. Also, to take into consideration with these statistics, we haven't increased personnel, but we also there's about 10%. It is 10% year-round that employees are off due to sick or vacation at any given time. So we do want to hire with that in mind as well. Let's see. I think that got everything on there. Okay, cash reserves. And I didn't fill that in. That was one last thing, but I do have it in my notes. You're going to have the cash reserves in your budget book, and a lot of those funds are reserved for certain things, and this is not counting, you know, things that we use for debt payment or we have to put aside for certain things. These are unrestricted funds that are used for infrastructure. I asked to have the operating expense for 3 months for the city, and that's about $6.5 million. And we have $7 million in the rainy day fund. That is good for the city, but we don't have a rainy day fund established for utilities. And I do have the total amount for that 3 months, and I highlighted it and said I'm getting back to it, but I gotta tell you what it is after this. But I did include the cash reserves for the city that can be used for infrastructure and the cash reserves for utilities. A part of that, like I said, I believe should be used for the rainy day fund. And then after that is reviewed, you know, council and the finance committee can look and see, you know, how much you want to put towards infrastructure instead of the debt service that is in the budget, and go from there. So this budget includes really expenses in a conservative way that we're putting all expenses in for the whole year, and then all infrastructure needs. And then with revenue, for the most part, very conservative with revenue proposals. We're using between 50 and 75% of the proposed amount for the increase. So both ways are very conservative. Okay, total debt. This is kind of a snapshot of where we are right now. We have for the city total debt in 2017 and what it would look like in 2020 based on the payment schedule, and utility debt and the airport debt to show you the total. You know, we're probably going to cut down almost a third of it by the end of this term. That's not counting any borrowing needs that we may need for infrastructure. But when we don't pay all of the city operating expenses out of utilities, the profit shows that we may not have to borrow money. But again, those are things that we really need to look at closer. Some of the things I wanted to highlight for some of the savings, we want to break out the larger expenses so they can be managed. This shows the actual expenses paid for engineering in 2017 for planning, public works, capital projects, and utilities. And then I plugged in the numbers for the average amount spent the last 4 years and the estimated savings in each department. Those estimated savings are on the bottom, not included anywhere. They're in actual numbers, but it's in the bottom of each department. So the average spent last 4 years, each year, was around $536,000. The total spent in 2017 was around $195,000, with a total savings of $341,000. The other thing we have broken out in this budget book that you'll notice is overtime. Overtime before was reported in the total salary, and when you do that, it can't be managed. So as part of the goals for the department heads, you know, we're putting in most of the hiring needs they're requesting, but the caveat is that overtime is going to be cut dramatically, and it will also be separated out so they can manage that, just like any other expense in their budget. So I do think that overtime can be cut, not only because of these hiring needs, but a lot of the equipment that we're purchasing was the cause, especially in public works, of a lot of the overtime. When this equipment is out, then we have to wait for it to get fixed, and then when it's fixed, catch up on everything very quickly, and that you know, did cost us a great deal in overtime as well. Okay, vehicles and equipment. Okay, I wanted to make this slide prettier, but ran out of time. In 2017, passenger vehicles equaled around 234. Granted, a lot of those things were at the fence, which is what they call it when they needed to be surplus, but we still were paying liability insurance for these things. When we broke out the mechanic department as just a department with its expenses, we were spending around $1 million to support the whole mechanic department. When we did the inventory, reconciled, surplused, and of course deducted from the liability insurance, the savings was around $80,000. And in 2018, we have more on the list to surplus, because when we buy a new vehicle or a new piece of equipment, it has to replace something. If it doesn't, then what happens is we keep it and we continue to fix those old things, and then we hand them down to people that may not need a car, And then when that car breaks down, we've set a precedence that that person has a car and we buy a new car. And we just can't do that anymore. So in 2018, already the total number of passenger vehicles has lowered to 142, down from 234. A lot of these, again, are going to be surplus in 2018, but that gives you an idea of how we're going to look at these capital purchases from here on out. Also, old equipment being replaced, especially in public works. There's several pieces of equipment that are so dangerous they wouldn't pass DOT. What we need to do with these large pieces of equipment in public works is look to lease them so we're always getting a new piece of equipment when the time comes that you're having to spend a lot of to keep them on the road. We're waiting too long to surplus. We're spending more on fixing vehicles than they're worth, buying new vehicles and never turning over the old ones, using things as a spare, and ultimately when it breaks down, well, I kind of went over that. We're no longer going to be in the car business. Taking all of these off of our liability insurance, the mechanical fees and the gas expense will lower. And the last thing about the leasing is the benefits will be that you know exactly what you're going to pay each year. And there's a life expectancy, and if the life expectancy before we really start spending more money than what the lease payment would be is probably going to be about 4 years. And we're not coming out of pocket that whole amount the first year. We're appropriating over 4 years. It's warranted, the maintenance is included. So we're going to save on mechanical, overtime, and we just won't have any surprises. Legal expense. For legal expenses, this is just a snapshot of some statistics. The city attorney total, it's not up to date for the whole year, but is approximately 117. An in-house full-time city attorney, you would have full access. I've gone over this before, and I do think it would be a good choice. Something to point out in this budget, and it's in the notes, is that almost $100,000 was paid to Hand-Durandal for mostly things that were service in 2016. And the average total expense paid for legal, this is not settlements or anything, was $520,000 a year last term. And the total legal for 2017 is $390,000, almost $400,000. But it's because we're spending a great deal of time settling out old lawsuits and old long-standing lawsuits, and that really is the main expense. So, miscellaneous savings. We are, this is the part that it really, there's a lot to it, and it's hard to quantify exactly, how much each of these items will total, but I do think it's going to add up to a lot. The annual savings from transitioning utility billing to Munis is going to be $73,000 a year. I didn't talk more about Munis, but there is, and you've seen that in all of the presentations, an expense for Munis so that every department is trained and the modules are implemented. When this happens, the efficiency level is just going to go, it's going to skyrocket. It really is. There's so much that Munis can do for us that we're doing manually that just takes a great deal of time. The tree lighting, contract labor, again, it's going to cost us less money, but more importantly, give the electric department more time to do the things that they need to do day to day. The credit card payment savings, we're switching over in April. It's under contract right now. It's going to be a huge savings. We're also going to encourage people to pay online to save in postage. We spend a great deal of money on postage, and they're going to be able to pay not only their utility bill, but any other expense that they pay to the city. They can pay online, and they'll see everything populate when they pull up their account number, from utility to rec center to, you know, whatever they owe the city. They can pay it all at once. I went over the overtime, fleet management, and then, of course, internal safety training is in this budget, which will decrease workman's comp expense, which is pretty high right now. Sales tax revenue. The sales tax revenue makes up the most of all the revenue the city receives, and it's going up every year at a great amount, and that's really in spite of the things that we can do better to increase this revenue. We don't spend any money promoting keeping our dollars locally and shopping local. We have tourism, but we don't spend money on tourism. We really need to capitalize on the people that are already coming, and we need to do that with, you know, once we have them here. It's not advertising necessarily more people coming to Fairhope, but once they're here, making sure they know all the things that Fairhope has to offer, and just make sure that they see all of our assets, go to the places that we feel, you know, our downtown merchants, our other independent businesses, all of our assets, you know, including the golf course. Those are things that can increase the sales tax revenue, and the difference, we're talking millions of dollars a year, and what we're kind of already getting. The lodging tax also, I wanted to point out, is flat. If sales tax is up, and we're pretty sure tourism, I mean, lodging tax should be up too, but I think that we don't have enough accommodations in Fairhope, and that is something that we need to look at. People come to Fairhope because it's a wonderful place to visit, but they're staying elsewhere, and this is something which it's a lost opportunity for revenue. Let's see. Revenue and rate. Okay. This budget has, and the details are in each tab, all the proposed rate and fee adjustments. And we want to do these keeping in mind that we obviously need it to sustain the city. When you separate out utilities, we have to have something that sustains the city. But we also want to make sure that when we're looking at fee adjustments to benefit those who live inside the city, they're already the ones that are paying the lion's share of the operation of the city, and the contribution we need is from outside the city. So in some departments, we are charging a little bit different for those who live outside the city limits, but you know, I think that's one of the things to consider. Everything from going to the rec center to going to play golf. If you live in Fairhope, that's really all we have to distinguish. With the new Munis system that we're going to put in, it will show each person based on a driver's license if they live inside the city limits. We really want to incentivize those who live inside the city. We want to make those benefits great. And then by doing that, too, we make it more desirable for people to come in. Again, all of these rates that I've included in the budget are very conservative. Did I put in here impact? I did talk about the impact fee study, and we just want to make sure that all the things that the impact fee can pay for due to growth, we want to make sure we appropriate it in the correct percentages to each department. And I think that's going to be, we're going to give the police department, for instance, I think, more funds. They use pretty much all of their impact every year, and we're trying to think of ways they can use their impact fees. Well, that's a department that has great needs. You're going to also see impact fees that have already been verified that can be used in each department. Some exciting news. Anything that you're adding to for growth can be covered. So the clubhouse, a big portion of the clubhouse can be paid for impact fees. There's just a lot of ways that we can look at impact fees and utilize them for, every year instead of leaving a balance, really taking advantage of those impact fees. And the person who has done the studies in the past does want to come and talk about all the different uses. And then just the last slide. This is the last slide, just top line figures. But you've got 2018, again, we're want to make sure that the city is taking care of all of its needs. We're showing the transfers from impact fees that can be paid out of the different capital improvements, for improvements or purchases. Capital purchases. Those are kind of verified that we can use out of, and they're separated out by department. Cash reserves, something that hasn't been displayed in a presentation was how much cash reserves we've been using for the city. We do use cash reserves, and they're transferred into the operating accordingly. And these cash reserves by department you'll see, and there's the total on the front page. And then we will have, of course, the utility transfer, the estimate for the transfer. Hopefully it will be lower. And then that will bring us back to around zero until we can not have that subsidy anymore. It would be around zero. And then the utility, though, is you'll see that same transfer amount on the bottom of the utility income and revenue. The increased profit is substantial for 2018. And that is about it. There's a lot of details to discuss in the book, but that's the overview.
Councilman Conyers, any questions, comments?
I've got a lot of things I've written down. I didn't know how much you want us to go ahead and jump into questions, or if you just want us to take this home and digest it and then come back later.
Both.
Okay. Let's see. Got to go back and find. I had a question related to actual deficit, and I got to go find the page where that was. Where you tracked 15, 16, and 17.
Yeah, I know that question. I'm going to ask that. You showed an operating deficit of over $6 million, and I feel like that was a little misleading because we only had $2+ million worth of transfers from utilities, so that would say that the government operated at a $4 million deficit. So where did that money come from? We paid off $3 or $4 million in debt. So
Right.
How did we operate at a $4 million deficit and still pay off $4 million worth of debt? That I just can't make the math work.
Like I said, utilities, the utility subsidy came in two different ways. It came from actual costs for the expenses from the city that were just in utilities. I mean, we had like the whole telephone going to, one of the gases, all of, this is what I'm saying, there's a lot.
Okay.
So that really makes up a lot of it.
But it's a deficit on paper. It's not a real.
Oh, right. No,
the people that see that in the public, I think that we went $4 million in debt last year and the year before.
I'm just trying to show, when we talk about actual numbers now, it's not about the past as much as it is to show you that if you just look at these numbers, you don't understand how good it is until you look at what it looks like from the previous years. It doesn't change any bottom line
Yeah, I think it's
from
just
anything.
still, and I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, I like what you're doing there, and I like the way you're reallocating it, the way it properly should be done, I do. But I still, I'm a little bit sensitive, since I boast about how much debt we've paid off, that when you see that slide, there are a lot of people that think that we operated $4 million in debt because of that, or even $6 million in debt, when in fact, we not only had a balanced budget, we paid off several $1 million in debt each of those years. That's all I want the public to understand, that
all
when you
this
see a
is-
deficit, that is it's clerical.
Go to the slide 5. Go up here.
Is that kind of what you were going to get at, Jimmy?
That was basically it. I
Well,
was
I'm
just
gonna-
trying to.
This is in your
figure out
book
the $5 million
also. This,
swing.
Okay. It's not just that, it's these other things too. See the cash reserves used in 2015?
Yeah, and some of that stuff might have been banked for.
Oh, yeah.
For soccer fields or something.
No question.
We didn't spend it in capital funds in one year, so it carried over, so we had a
Absolutely.
huge expense one year. I'm just only saying this for the people that think that
Right.
it looks like, if you look at 2016, it looks like we
Things
operated
turned
at a
around by $7
6.3.
million.
What's
Well-
that?
That things turned around by $7 million in surplus deficit.
No, because
Right.
what I'm trying to show here too is that even when you had the budgets before, it didn't show the money that was paid out of reserves or impact fees. All I'm doing is presenting in a way that every line will be included, and right here, it is apples to apples. With everything that I'm showing you, it's using the same information for each year. It's not going to change.
And
You
that
know,
chart is really showing general government. Is that not true, Mayor?
This is
So,
all
yeah,
about
so
general
if you look
government.
at city surplus deficit, that's a better title, is general government, because it's
Listen,
not
well, I
a
just said
snapshot of the
city.
entire city. This entire city didn't operate at a $6.3 million deficit in 2016. In fact, the city operated with a surplus in 2016.
That's because I don't want to show a surplus because of, it needs to show what it is before transfers from utilities.
But we couldn't have been at a but that's what I'm saying. The transfers were only 2.9, so if you took that out, you're still at a minus 3.4. And we didn't operate at a deficit.
Right, it's not, we didn't because of the transfers.
Because utilities sharing
And
in
for
the general
and because
government's
of the,
expenses.
that really is it. I mean, all I'm doing here is just part of a presentation, because if you're looking at 17 and that's all you're looking at compared to the other years,
So if
you have
put
to, you have to be able to show that this is what we've accomplished
Right.
by rearranging these.
Stratifying
And,
things.
you know,
And
we
like I said,
might,
once again,
we might have
understand.
more, and we are going to have more
I appreciate
expenses.
that, I
Yeah.
really do. But I think if you put another slide up there and showed surplus deficit for
have
utilities,
that. Oh, yeah,
it would
that's here.
have to show a big surplus to show that we paid,
Okay.
it would have to show a big surplus, because not only did we balance the budget, we paid tons of debt off, and we didn't use up our cash reserves.
Well, I was going to show you, this is the utility subsidy for 15, 16, 17. And then I want to show the utility, hold on, utility surplus 6. Okay. This doesn't show any transfers.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a key slide there, too.
Yeah, that was in it. That was the, which slide? Anyway, and that's in your book too.
Number 6.
Yeah, it's basically, but what it is showing is the operating expense that was paid from utilities, because you have to add that back in if you're comparing 15, 16, and 17.
You take that out, and you still show a 6.9 million operating.
No, I'm sorry, this is utility.
You're right, but you
Okay.
still show, say, for 2016 or 2017, let's just use 2016, a $6.9 million profit, and
But this
you
is
take that and add it to the
utilities,
government.
not city.
I know, but you take it and you add it to the snapshot that you gave of general government to give people an overall view of what's going on financially in the city, because we're an enterprise of government and utilities. And I think that that's important, because that will show that we didn't have any city deficits.
What we had, this is the city surplus. What we've always reported is utilities and the government. I'm just showing here that that's how the profits would change, okay? Going back as well, just a couple years. But with the city, I'm just trying to see if I've got anything.
And understand, I'm not being critical. I don't mind what you're doing. I'm just trying to tell the public again that I don't want to give a false impression that we were operating at a deficit. You have to take both enterprises of the city to show that we were operating in the black.
And I think you're saying, and I think that's right. And I like the way it's broken down. I think it makes it easier to follow overall. And I think your point is you just want to show how we're becoming, the city government itself is trying to become less reliant on the utilities.
Well, it will be a transfer from utilities, but the city did, was at a deficit when you don't have operating. Right, the government, not the utilities.
Just general government.
But the utilities, yeah, they'll always be reported government and then utilities.
Yeah, but as a joint enterprise, looking at these 216 numbers, since you've added the 2.7 twice, you've deducted it from the city and then deducted it again from there. If you add that in, it's really,
you got to add it back in.
It's really showing about a balance. If you take that money from utilities, it's really showing a balance with a
I think she's
about 3.4.
I think she's saying that number's built into the 29.6 in expenses.
Well, that's what I'm saying. This total expenses here, we just added the operating that you would add to that 27.
Sure.
That's the true amount of that net profit for 15 and 16. When you take it out, then of course the profit goes up, but it was paid out of utilities before. We didn't change that for the past.
And I'm agreeing.
And then on the front page, we did the same thing. When you see the actual front page, that's not all. It doesn't show those operating expenses at all in 15 and 16.
No,
it's just a note on the bottom.
I'm not questioning the numbers.
Right.
I'm just.
So the expenses to the
paint a
city
better
should have gone
picture for our
up
people.
by that amount.
And
I think you're right, Jay. I think you add that 2.8 back in, you're at 7.7, 9.7, and then you take the deficit out from the general government, and you'll see how much debt was paid.
Yeah.
Right, that's about what it comes to.
But I mean, I agree with the way that it's set up, just as long as everybody understands it.
Right.
But I do think we are. I don't think we'll ever be completely independent, the city government completely independent of our utilities, because like you said, Jack, we are a joint enterprise, but at the same time, we do need to be less reliant on them
and accounting needs
to cover all the issues.
I can tell you that we absolutely can be self-sufficient. And then any money transferred from utilities goes to what we want it to go to.
No,
I mean, right now it's going to operation.
Right.
Okay? But there is no question that the city can be self-sufficient.
Right, but what I'm saying is I mean, it'd be nice to be able to use that money instead of balancing the budget with it, to use it to fix infrastructure upgrades. But I mean, it's always going to be there, and we're always going to have the advantage of being able to use that. So I mean, I think we're agreeing on a lot of the same things without saying we agree on it.
But I wanted to mention that the first page did not take into account any of this. This was strictly so that's included in your budget, but if you look at the first page, it does not have, it's just on the bottom right here.
I don't know, that too.
All right, Jimmy, back to your question.
Yeah, we got a couple other questions.
Okay.
Just flipping through, and probably just need to be walked through this, and I see you've got some notes here, but I'm under revenue and transfers, second page, item interest and rents. There's about $1.2 million swing in the utility admin services and about a $450,000 swing in utility reimbursement, and it's got to do with the utility department taking over the reading of meters.
The utility admin, what that is, and I kind of want to change it to a different word. All that is the utility share of the administrative cost. In that, you know, we do have a percentage that the utility does pay and has always paid
Right.
from the city administration. But the increase, we did put all of meter into utilities.
Okay.
But then we have notes here too. Yeah, I think you have to look at
I guess that's why, but it went from 165 to about 2.865, but now it's going to drop back down to 2 million.
what,
It's the 41260 line item.
Jimmy, where are you?
what tab?
Tab 1, second page, middle of the page.
So we're on tab 1. This is our tab. Okay.
Yeah, that's
And
what
then
it
on
was.
what page?
Second page, middle of the page. And I was trying to figure out where that $5 million swing was coming from, and
This is what I've said. Meter,
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
read that?
The meter expenses are now in utilities, but not only that, but the budget for 17 just got reported incorrectly. It was just wrong. Those two accounts are normally expensed exactly as budgeted. So the original budget and the actual 17 do not properly reflect the reclassifications that should have been included in the 17 budget, if that makes sense. Because that account is always expensed according to the budgeted number.
okay. Right, because it's a sharing of,
Right.
so whatever you budget is what you're paying for.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So if you're looking at the budget 17
So
column.
the
and
2 million for 18 is a more accurate number of what you feel like it should have
Yes,
been
exactly.
for 17. Okay. And then what about the reimbursement for revenue department? Same issue?
Same issue, exact same issue.
Okay. So that one was 604. Then we went to $1 million, but now we're dropping that to 240. Is that going to be an accurate number of where it ought to be?
That is correct.
Okay.
So if it's not going to be in a utility transfer, is as you collect utility payments, is a portion of that put into the general fund?
This is just the labor.
This is just the salaries for the revenue department and all the general administrative people, the payroll taxes and their retirement.
But I mean, it has to be offset by income. It's got to be
Well,
paid
all
with
of the income for utilities goes to utilities. All of the income, revenue, taxes, all of that goes to the city. So just the expenses for the labor, but they're sharing a percentage of that labor for utilities. But like I said, you're not going to appropriate that same amount for revenue. All the revenue goes to utilities. Utilities there'll be a clear transfer to the city accordingly. And even when we get to the point where it's not an amount that we need just for our operation, utilities should pay a percentage of net profit to the city anyway. You know, we're not including that in this presentation, but that should be that and can be paid for anything. Right now it's paying so we can break even.
That's kind of what I was getting at, though. Just, you know, if you have somebody that's collecting utility payments in the revenue department, and that their salary is split among many functions. I was just saying that, you know, rightfully some of that comes back to general government, and so somehow that revenue from the utilities has got to be divided among the portions of that person's salary. So
Let me give you an example of, let's just say hypothetically, that you have a bookkeeper that does part-time work for one business and part-time work for, no, because she's full-time. I'm going to give you outside the city.
She functions for everybody within the
I know,
city.
but I'm going to give you something outside the city. You're going to have two businesses and they do part-time work. You're paying that accountant or bookkeeper for their labor, it doesn't say, well, because you do 20% of my bookkeeping and my profits are $100,000, I should give you $20,000 of that. That doesn't, the revenue part does not enter into that labor and shouldn't. All of that revenue should go to the department that produced that income. All we're doing right now, instead of hiring the counterpart of each admin, rehiring that for the utility department, I mean, that wouldn't make sense either. We're just appropriating the proper expense to that department. The revenue is the revenue and should be put into, all of it should be put into that, whoever.
Another question on engineering expenses. You said we're saving about 300,000 or 325 year over year, but I know we had a 6-month moratorium. How much do you think that impacted? I know they were still busy, but
Right. This is,
that's
well,
not.
if you go to the general government,
I mean, I'll go back to the engineering.
Yeah, I think it ought to be a comparison of how much capital projects we had versus, year over year as
Well,
well,
that's
because
why I
it's a
broke it
function,
out.
also a function of how much you have going on.
all this is, I mean, anything that I'm breaking out right now is just to show apples to apples, but capital projects, public works, planning would be more for a moratorium. But the utilities and all these other expenses would be the same. We appropriated based on the department, and we're just showing like figures. I mean, I tried to just make it simple. That's the average for the last 4 years. It doesn't mean that it's not going to go up next year.
Right. and
But I'm
that's
just
right.
saying that these are things that, when broken out accordingly, it's something we can manage. And in this budget also is an engineering department, and in the engineering department, scoot up, we have a proposed entry-level engineer and an engineer, I can't remember, more of a senior engineer, and then all of the SCADA, mapping, GIS, all of that in one department that will be split and shared between really public works and utilities, with a small percentage going to planning. All of those professional positions are going to greatly decrease this, because we have so many needs in public works and in utilities, and we can't expect Richard Peterson and Richard Johnson to do everything. It's more to take care of the smaller jobs with their kind of seal of approval. And anyway, I think it'll be a great department to add.
That's a hard sell for me. I mean, you gotta, one of the things that happens when you hire an engineering firm to do work for you, you have their support staff, you have all of their overhead that you're paying for, and you have the software. I mean, software alone for an engineer can run $40,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year, just for one engineer. So we got to be very careful that we include all of those expenses.
I think in this budget we have an amount of money that will be, it's hard to get all the details, but the things that engineers can be on hand for are not always things that we would hire an outside person to do, but it does reduce our liability because one is there. And this is, if you own all of your utilities, you're absolutely going to need engineers on hand. This is not going to ever eliminate needing to hire outside engineering for different projects. That's just always going to be there. But you can't expect the top level person to do all of that minutia. That's all it is. It really is to take care of the liability on a daily basis. And doing this when it comes to stormwater and our roads, and, you know, we're going to have the top-level management that can do the seal of approval, but that person is not going to be there to take care of all of the little details. And if we don't put these engineers in place, then you're either going to make those people, those two people, do that and have to get contract labor for the rest, or you're going to be able to have that department take care of it.
I guess my fear would be adding them and still having to hire outside firms, because engineers, unfortunately, are so specialized these days that you could even take a civil engineer that they might be experts in roads, but they're not experts in drainage, and vice versa. So, you know, the person that you hire, it's hard to find one that's well-versed in everything that needs to be, that they need to be well-versed in. So you find yourself, you know, still going outside. I've seen it over the last years. We hired a lot of people that were supposed to do some things, but yet we're still subbing things out that I've never seen us spend money on before. It seems to be growing exponentially.
The things that we're hiring out right now is because we have one engineer.
Well, I'm not. I wasn't specifically talking about engineering. I was.
Yeah, I'm just saying in general that would really apply to any position. Anything that we're adding to the city, I think you can have that same argument. But I do honestly think that when you, just like you can see in 1 year, now it's not going to explain away all of the savings because there's different things to consider. I'm just saying that when you have those things in place, I do think that you're going to mitigate your liability. I really do. And they're handling, like I said, it's not like you're hiring this one person for one department. You're hiring it, and it would be expensed accordingly to those departments. And this was, you'll see in the budget, it's entry-level positions that would be managed by Richard Peterson and Richard Johnson.
Okay. Jimmy, you still up?
All right, I'm sorry. I'm happy to share and let somebody else
Go ahead.
go. I'm just kind of bouncing all over,
Go ahead.
looking through. In part of the reclassed utility and departmentalized expenses, I just flipped over to the library, airport authority.
This would be under appropriations, but I did put
Yeah,
on one
appropriations.
spreadsheet. And the bottom of this is
The transfers
for-
to capital projects is what I'm looking at right now, the actual last year versus the reclassed.
Okay. The transfers for capital projects are paid out of the reserves. So we just put in there what the capital projects are for that year, total it up, and that's what would be taken out of the reserves.
Okay, so the actual that was paid was the $1,992,000.
For 17, it would be in the previous years. 18.
But we
was
only
just a-
had to move 21,000 over that year, last year. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
No, anything under capital projects, you know, I don't know where the 20.
I'm on the under other expenditures, transfers to capital projects.
You're looking at budget. I mean, we budgeted that, but we didn't transfer any. It says actual.
Actual was 21,000.
Right.
Right.
We didn't do any capital projects.
Right. So is that going to? I mean, is that? I guess I'm looking at the budget from last year. So that's 21,000, but we had estimated in there 1.9 million. So is that 1.7 gonna catch up? No, 1.8.
The 1.8, I mean, it did have, yeah, I know, but I'm saying, whatever the estimate is for the capital projects is what's in the budget based on what we have right now, what we need.
Okay.
this is not included in, like, all the utility. This is just,
Right. It's
This is just
Out
city.
of the, out of government.
This is
into
out of
capital
government.
projects.
but, I mean, you're looking at actual numbers. Yes, we wanted to put in an amount that was similar to previous years for the 2017 budget, but we didn't end up spending any of that money this year. We are going to, though, in 2018.
Right, and I guess that's what I'm just saying. I want to make sure that that's not something that's going to sneak up on us because we had the
Jenny,
21.
I just see a mistake. If you'll look at your monthly summary, under the table of contents,
It would be under, it's not monthly summary, it's under,
very
it's
beginning?
called something else.
it's an overview. It's
Overview.
like right behind the table of contents.
Okay, right
Okay, look
here.
at that first page. Go down to the bottom,
Okay.
that actual 17 number, all this feeds into, and it is a nightmare
Okay,
to
so
do.
the actual,
Look at, it's 1.923719, that's what
Yep.
it should be.
okay.
That was just a boo-boo. So that number should,
Oh,
you should
and
see
that,
that.
when I said we didn't do any, we did not put any in the budget for, there were unknowns, the clubhouse, the library, and all of that. We didn't spend money on those capital projects. They are in this budget.
Okay.
We didn't put anything in last budget because we didn't know how much it was going to be yet.
Do you see what, the number I'm talking about?
I do, and my question, I may not be phrasing it correctly, but I guess what I'm saying is, we had in our budget 1.9 million, we actually spent 21,000, so
Well, no, she's saying
Am I-
that you look, you have
the
to look at the
1.932
overview.
is the
That's
actual.
the right number. That is the correct
Okay,
number.
okay. That clears up for me.
All these spreadsheets feed into the main front page, and that was one that didn't feed. It was right on the overview.
It just didn't transfer to
Yes.
this page, gotcha.
I wish there was a master budget program that would just spit out a budget,
Mm-hmm.
just like we needed, but unfortunately, there's not.
I would say somebody else jump in with some questions, though.
I was just going to say, I just thought of this, but all of the utilities that, I mean, we pay, we're kind of breaking them out by department as well. It's just their share of all of the city's utilities for each building and department, and then, of course, utilities takes care of its own, the library, and that's why you'll see some of the figures on appropriations a little bit higher, because we are breaking out true expenses there.
Councilman Brown, you got any questions or comments?
Not yet.
Councilman Robinson,
I'm not prepared to ask any questions.
you haven't fully digested the budget yet?
Is that, no. I was enjoying listening to Councilman Conyers ask questions. That was,
All right, so back to Councilman Conyers.
I'm just trying to save y'all from having to have another 3-hour meeting.
Yeah, really.
Go ahead and get some of the questions out of the way.
But we can meet also when you look at it.
Right.
And go over all of this for sure.
All right.
Because you'll have a lot more questions.
I'll have a lot
But
more
the notes, I think, will help a lot too, even though they're tiny. They're notes that I felt like if I was looking at this, I would wonder why this is different or why. you know.
Right, and some of those, you have good notes there, I still just needed a little bit more of an explanation.
Do you have copies of this, or will, you may not today, Jill, I know you were putting this together probably as late as this afternoon, if I had to guess, I saw them spread out this morning. Will you have copies of these for the Finance
Yes.
Committee?
Yes.
We already do.
We already have books for them.
They have them, okay, great. So council, let's, I know that you'll be pouring over that, there's a lot of work. We'll move on in the meeting now, but we'll be bringing up questions, and I would just encourage you to talk to the mayor, talk to Jill, bring up any questions you have, and just the instructions are that appreciate Mayor Wilson and Jill and her staff and your staff in putting this together. A lot of work, a ton of work.
Really a lot.
And at the same time, just, I hate to say this, but remind you, it's a budget recommendation, and, we really get to, I say this every year, we only get to play with a small amount of the budget. The fixed costs are the fixed costs. The fixed revenues are fixed. And it's being tweaked, and I think in a positive direction. And I know that there will be changes. I'm sure that there will be changes to the budget, so we'll debate them and hopefully get it passed soon. I don't want to bind anybody to a date, but it's not going to be December, and hopefully it won't be November, and hopefully it'll be sometime.
Don't jinx it. But I do want to point out that we did, where appropriate, to show you how this is being paid, because some things are being paid out of impact. Some things are being paid out of, reserves, but anyway, it kind of shows how things are being paid. And the impact fee study, that's going to be a pass-through, because the impact fee money can pay for that. So we tried to do that on everything as well, which is why you'll see that even though there's a lot in the budget, there's also a lot of notes that show how that's being paid. So
You mentioned that the impact can pay for the clubhouse.
Part of it.
Part of it. Only the part that is an addition.
No.
And that's in there too.
Didn't I put in there? You did.
Okay. Not new if it's replacing. Anything to do with growth except for streets. Streets you repave because of growth, but you're paving the whole street. But with other things, like if you have a tennis court and you have a dilapidated tennis court and you want to build 2 more, replace one and add an addition, then you would be able to get the addition paid for. And we're going to be able to, and I'd like that to be part of the budget too, is to show this is the totals on all of our impact fees. What can we do? What can we put in the plan that's over and above what we're just asking for from department heads? Because we should plan on some of these things under, Parks and Rec and things like that.
And one other question on new hires proposed in the budget. Obviously, we wouldn't be hiring everybody the day after the budget's passed, but
We still have openings from 2000.
right. But are those salaries accounted for as if they were funded for the full year?
It's all year.
Okay.
It's all year.
Thank you.
A lot of the expenses, like I said, won't even be all year, but it's all in the budget.
Good.
So,
Committee updates. Back to you, Councilman Conyers.
Library committee met the other day, meets again October 16th at 5 at the library. Saw their budget in here. It looks like it's the same amount as what was requested, so got that. Then again, just the environmental board wants to, I know they're appreciative of the efforts to incorporate Clean Marina into the new Fairhope docks, so thank you for working with them, Lynn, and everybody else. That's it.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
No report.
Councilman Robertson. I want to thank everybody. Since the last council meeting, we had the special called meeting to pass the resolution so that the airport authority could get the funding. That was largely to pay for engineering study for phase 4. We're not going to get an FAA grant for this fiscal year. That's what we've been told. Is there are a lot of small airports that didn't get their funding, and we don't get funding every year. We don't. It's not an automatic, but I think that will be near the top of the list for the following year to finish out that east side. And I think it's going to be important that the airport decide how they're going to protect what's been done in the interim in phase 3 before we put that final top coat of asphalt there. And it'll also allow the airport some time just to, exactly determine how they want to market that area. We had an airport authority meeting the other day, and it kind of centered around some of the discussion around that. But we did have some people that came to the meeting that still expressed a concern about aircraft noise, and they do admit. I want to make it clear that the noise that they're complaining about are not due to airplanes at our airport. But I also want to say that I just don't believe there's a solution. I don't think the military is going to up and move based on some complaints in Fairhope. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation, and we've raised our minimum standards out there at the airport. But as far as planes that fly in from Florida and do maneuvers above the skies in Fairhope, you know, I don't think there's anything we can do about it. I really don't. And a lot of people like them, and not everybody's bothered by them. In fact, I think it's a small minority of people, and they shouldn't be ignored, but I don't think that that's going to affect change. I think that the congressmen and senators from Florida would probably frown upon that if they were to move that pilot training, for sure. And Industrial Development Board has not met since, I think at the last meeting, did I give a report on the SAO? We're still waiting on numbers. We haven't seen the economic impact from that yet, but it was widely attended, probably not as much as we had liked, just because there were natural disasters occurring at the same time, and so there were some states that didn't show up, some fairly large contingencies that weren't able to make it. With that, I'll close committee updates. Department heads. Haven't been to this in a while. I'm going to ask if any department head wants to give us an update. I'm going to ask you to come up to the table and give it to us as opposed to sitting at your seat. It doesn't work out too well. We need to get in the habit of coming up here and giving us updates. Anybody? Oh, it's just Joe. Come on, bud.
I just want to say today's day one on inventory. We're shut down for the week, so ask everybody to be patient until we get through this week of inventory, and we'll get back in the normal routine.
Did you guys send a crew to Orlando?
We did.
And are they back?
They are. They returned Wednesday.
Okay. How are things looking over there?
They were released. There was still damage, but it's mainly left to some of the outstanding contractors and municipals themselves.
Friday I was driving west on I-10 and I saw dozens and dozens of utility trucks. I mean, they were just convoys of utility trucks. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to make light of what may be still a bad situation, but it looks like maybe at least for the peninsula of Florida, they're getting the power restored.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Hello, Bobby Hall from the golf course. We had the club championship this weekend, and so I'd like to thank the people who played. The winner is Todd Richburg. He won. You know Todd very well. Senior division was Joe Pomeroy, who shot his age, 71. And senior division, Nathan Cox, who's 75 years old and shot 75. Also, Dick Knoll is 78 and shot 75. So we had some guys shoot their age. So a lot of fun out at the golf course. I have a question in the City Council. The Men's Golf Association would like to know if the winners of each of those divisions and the Ladies Club Championship could have their own parking position out at Quail Creek. They do at many clubs where the winner of the club has a parking spot recognizing him or her for the year. The MGA would pay for the signs and want to know if that's permissible. But I don't know from, maybe Eric can help me or somebody in Public Works, can we give a parking spot in front of Quail Creek or over to the side?
It's a good question. It's a public course, and where you said clubs do that, but I don't know if public courses do it. I don't know if it.
I think some of them do. It's just I'd like to ask permission instead of forgiveness.
So you're going to ask for forgiveness if we don't give you permission?
Well, they're willing to pay for it. It's 4 spots, and I think we have plenty of parking, and except for big tournaments, and they wouldn't use them during big.
Well, what I see that happens a lot is a lot of times that when that whichever champion is can't be there, they give it up to a friend anyway and say, I'm not going to be there, park in my spots. We get used.
Well, I think we have plenty of space, but I wanted to, if there needs to be discussion or maybe come back later at another time to find out if there's an
I
ordinance
think
or
the
anything
mayor
that
can
might
even
not.
probably give permission for something like that.
I know it's kind of
I don't know
unusual,
that that
but
requires.
it's
We're
a
not
ni-
deeding them property. I think the mayor could probably
It's a nice thing.
tell you yay or nay on that.
All right.
I think we should just authorize the mayor to say yes or no with a recommendation of yes.
Okay. Well, that's all. Everything else is in pretty good shape. And keep the rain away.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just mention that the Restore Act has a public comment period coming up on Wednesday at 3:30 in Mobile Government Plaza in the auditorium. So this is for people that will want to come up and speak in support of the two proposals that we put into the portal for what they call Bucket 1. This is the last public comment period for that bucket. And it's to give input and support on the two requests we have in there. One is for 600 and I believe 620,000 for a comprehensive land use plan and an update to our comp plan. And then the other is 6.2 million for a working waterfront and green space restoration plan. The narratives for both of those I've sent out to our planning commission and our environmental advisory board and harbor board, but I have them that I can share with all of you as well. And maybe we can actually post them on our website. Jeff is out there, he can see me, so people know what they're for. And the other thing is the staff did, we reviewed our ACE plan, the Alabama Communities of Excellence Strategic Plan on Friday, and just started talking about that a little bit. And we're going to make take in their staff recommendations, make updates to it, have another meeting with staff, and then we hope to get together with council as well and talk that through. But it's just a starting point for us to have some input from staff and council and strategic planning. And that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon. I'm sorry Kevin's not here because I wanted to let you know the water tank is the bids for the painting will be October 10th. And we have a pre-bid meeting Thursday morning. I will say there's been a few complaints from some of the residents on the east side of Walmart where coverage is not quite as good with cell phone coverage there as it was with the antenna on the tank. I know AT&T is applying to the FAA for a permit to raise the temporary tower as much as they can. I think they can raise it 20 to 40 more feet, and they haven't got word back from that, but hopefully that'll help. I've talked to a couple of people on the phone, and they're upset obviously, and then I hate that. I just let them know that I'm not a cell phone provider, and I don't know what all the issues are with antennas and heights, but all of that has something to do with coverage and quality of service. And it's really up to AT&T to provide what they need to provide to mimic or to replace the service they have, on a temporary basis until we get the tank painted. So I don't know what else to tell them, but we're working on that.
Can I stop you right there while you're on that?
Yes.
I've had several people call, and what I've told them is it's a necessary evil. We have to paint our water towers. It has to be done, and it's nothing new for AT&T.
That's right.
Shouldn't come as a surprise to them. We gave them, we were required to give them 180 degree
6 months notice.
6 months notice, and I think what they did was they took that down like almost immediately. They didn't have to, but they did. So that's up to them. But what according to what some citizens have told me, is AT&T is telling people that we took their antenna off the water tower, which is not true. We don't even touch their antenna. To give you a similar example was the last water tower that we painted, and they have contract crews that take those antennas down and reinstall them. They took those antennas down when 3G was the norm, the protocol, and then when they put up the temporary antennas, the mobile towers, if you will,
Right.
when they did that, they converted to 4G. When their contractor put the antennas back on the water tower, they put the old 3G antennas back on the water tower, and nobody had any service, and they blamed the city of Fairhope for doing that when we weren't a part of that. It's important for you council members and mayor to know that the history there, that we give them 180 days notice. And it's like you said, they're responsible for removing them and providing service, and it's done every day all over the country.
Right. And I agree, and I hope they understand that. I mean, we're working with AT&T any way we can to help.
Sure.
You know, whether they need to have more space from a different location that we may have to do more temporary antenna locations, I don't know, but you know, I've offered anything we can do to help with that. On the marina, I got some proposals back on identifying the capacity of the travel lift, and then it's going to be a little bit more than the $3,500 that was allocated in the resolution at the last meeting. I don't know if you want to move forward or not. I talked with Lynn this morning, and you know, we're looking at the potential for dry boat storage and whether or not that location to launch and bring boats back would be at the same location as the current travel lift. I think the way the site would work out, you might want to move it back a little bit further, maybe on the other side of the 17 Turtle building. And so if we were to look at just the capacity of the travel lift, it may be a little bit different without some geotechnical investigations we were looking to do, but it's still going to be a little bit more than the 3,500 it looks like, because of the, and the problem is there's no plans on what's there. You know, everything is made basically homemade. You know, it's not like a standard beam. It's an I-beam system made up from, I think, the old water tank that was taken down in the middle of town is actually where the materials came from. So there's a lot of investigation just to see.
Well, I thought the premise was just to get rid of that system and put a new one in.
Well, we were going to evaluate the capacity of it. And, I mean, if the capacity's fine, we can maybe shore up any weaknesses, but we don't have to do that immediately. And it would give us some time to look at some other improvements around in the on the other parts of the marina. The change order for the decking and the refurbishment of the bulkhead in front of the fuel island, it looks like it just looks like it's going to get too high to me to want to work with the contractor out there. He's submitted a price that's maybe 3 times what the early estimate was on the work, and it's just difficult for me to want to just proceed as if it's something that looks like they may want to take advantage of. I don't know, but the itemized costs seem a little bit high in some places, and I hadn't talked back. I've sent the engineer of record, all the information, and asked her to look at it and then see if she's contacted the contractor in terms of where they might have places to save money. And I don't know if they're going to come up with anything from that or not, but I just let y'all know how things go from here. But right now, I don't know that we're going to be able to finish that part with the contract we have in place. But other than that, y'all have any questions?
Yeah, I got a question about the travel lift. I mean, is that not something we should put on whoever leases the boatyard? Well, if we're just renting slips, why do we need the travel lift?
We don't necessarily need that travel lift. We could, but I think that we also have an obligation to make those repairs. And like you said, if we were ever to use the conventional forklift type boat lift, then we would need to come up with a plan. The current lift system
Well, I think if we can at least define the capacity of that travel lift, there are, you know, it's just like bridges you see on county roads. They'll have a sign where this bridge is rated at so many tons or whatever. And at least that takes some of the liability from a boatyard operator.
What's the capacity of the lift that they have there? The travel lift that's there? What's the capacity of the lift itself?
I've heard 30 tons. I have not
30 tons.
verified that with anybody.
Well, that's probably a good number, though. I mean, I was thinking probably 40, 50,000 pounds, so 60,000 is probably not too unreasonable.
Right, but I mean, it's not about what the travel lift itself can handle. It's about what the structure it's going to be riding back and forth on.
No, but I'm still looking ahead to
Well,
the
that's gotta-
boatyard operator. If they're operating a lift that has a 30-ton capacity, you got to assume that the next person is going to have a lift of a 30-ton
Correct.
capacity. So you're looking at
And I think they
60
rate
ton,
these
60,000.
boat lifts based on where you are geographically, you know, like in Mobile Bay. I think 30 tons is about the most you're going to get a boat to come in and actually have service performed on it on a dry dock situation here.
Well, you've got some of those boats that come in there, you know, 55, 60 feet. You know, they're going to be displacing 30 tons.
I'm sure they're, and that's the thing about posting the limit, at least on a temporary basis, that at least they can turn away business if it's beyond that capacity
Right.
for now.
Right.
And then we can work on how we go.
Well, and then whoever operates the boatyard, if they have a higher capacity, you know, that could be, the onus could be on them to say, well, you're going to have to improve
Right.
the infrastructure because this is the limit. I mean, this is the yard as you get it, this is the limit.
And I do know we're also looking at taking the fuel tanks out. I think there's some problems with those in terms of rust and corrosion and potential leaks from, you know, just where they are now. So we'd be looking at some temporary tanks and probably move them back behind somewhere. But getting the layout of the marina in terms of a master plan, it really is the first step we need to take in terms of knowing where these things need to be placed.
We're going to need to know that when we lease out the boatyard,
Right.
because some of that property's got to belong to
And I think
the marina.
between Sherry Lee and Lynn, I think they're working on that. We just don't want to get the cart before the horse in terms of where we're going to start getting geological surveys done on capacities for travel lifts or anything.
You know, while we're at it, council, I think that the leases expire October the 13th, and, you know, we're not going to have that out for bid prior to that. I mean, do we look at a transition time? Do we extend their lease a little bit longer, or do we just give up the revenue for a couple of months until we get that taken care of? I mean,
I think if they're willing to do a month to month, give them, you know, whenever we receive the bids back in, give them 1 month from that date to move off the premise. I mean, otherwise, like you said, what if they end up winning a bid?
Right, you'd
They
hate for them to
leave
shut
and they
down
gotta come
and then-
back. That doesn't make any
yeah,
sense.
because there's got to be a transition time.
Right.
I don't think that you can say you have to, because they should be able to operate up to October the 13th, and you can't reasonably expect them to be completely vacated on October the 14th.
And I think the lease.
Because that penalizes them, I think.
Right. And back to the lift, I think we need to put something in the lease where the cost is shared with whoever is the new tenant of that space, because they might not want to operate as a boatyard. They might want to operate a paddleboard shop, or who knows what they want to operate in that building. It might not be used for, so we're going to spend another $5,000-$10,000 on evaluating a lift that might not be used.
Well, that current lift, I mean, the runners, like you said, they were homemade out of the old water tower, and I mean, the runners or rails, whatever you call it, they're rusted with pieces of plywood covering the holes. I mean, I can't imagine we'd even want to fool with that.
Well,
Say leave it alone.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that.
I think we ought to offer a minimum. Just when we put it out for bid, we have to say what the facility is, you know.
Right.
They may not use it, but we have to have, you know, some, I don't know, something. Because we have to move forward with it now. If we wait 3 months from now, then you never get a tenant. I don't know. We definitely need to, we need a solution though quickly.
Just the boats that are on the dry dock now and putting them back in the water, I mean, just to know what the capacity of that lift is, to know if there should be some caution in how you put those boats back in the water, I think is important. And that may be a process that we want to move forward with rather quickly.
Well,
But anyway, I mean, I think, if we just do the capacity of the travel lift itself, and I'm going to throw out numbers that I think are pretty close, $4,500 is about where we'd be just getting the
so
capacity
just
done.
another $1,000?
Yes.
Oh,
And I think it's worth it to do that.
okay. We'd have voted on that tonight, Richard.
Thank you.
Who's next? Mr. Pope, you're not a department head.
Not yet.
I'm kidding with you. Eric, anything?
Unless you want to talk about the erosion control ordinance after.
We'll get to that on the agenda portion. We're actually going to get to that today as well. Chief Ellis? Mr. Dias?
No, sir.
You're kidding me.
They don't stand up, they don't have anything.
Let's see, we got anybody else? Mr. Cool? Okay. Chief Pettis?
We don't have anything.
Robert, you hiding?
Not at all. I was going to talk about the Marines with Richard beat you to.
All right. Is Mr. McCrory here? Okay.
Still off for surgery.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. We'll move into the agenda. Item 5, Wayne, you'll cover that, right?
Yes, sir.
Item 6, you'll cover that?
Yes, sir.
Item 7 will be deleted from the agenda. In fact, you can just take item 7 off the agenda. Item 8, that'll be you, Eric.
Yes, sir.
Okay, item 9, pretty self-explanatory. Item 10, I can speak to that. Shirley, can you speak to that as well? Okay, item 11, who's going to speak to that? Mayor, will you speak to that?
Let me look at it.
This is your request to fill that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this was just to
Make it
make it
full-time.
40 hours instead of that. That's really for any temporary fill.
Any temporary, okay, that's good clarification. You'll remind us of that. Okay, item 12, I believe that we may have a rewritten rules and lease agreements. Who's going to speak to item 13?
I will.
Wayne?
Yes, sir.
Item 14 on the purchasing of flowers. Deborah? Okay. Item 16, will Jeff come in, speak to that? Okay.
Skip 15, didn't we?
Deborah said she did both.
14, 15.
Okay, 17, the clubhouse. Who's going to speak to that?
Deborah.
18, I can speak to that. And 19 and 20 are self-explanatory. What is that? Yep, yep. We got a few minutes. I want to bring up, I was going to bring this up in council comments, but I'll go ahead and bring it up now. I wish that Dan McCrory was here, but since he's not, I want to direct this to the mayor and to Mr. Peterson. And I would like for us to, Mobile Baykeepers took those bacteria counts recently in the creek area and the basin area there, and we had not had any reported sewer spills for some time, and the bacteria counts were high. And we have a lot of concerned citizens. I think we need to undertake, and hopefully, Mobile Baykeepers would, help us out with this. But I don't think it'd be very expensive at all. I don't even know if it would be any cost. I mean, we could get people to volunteer, but we need to undertake a study to try to find out what's causing these high bacteria counts. I think that we could, when they get a high bacteria count, is it enough? Can we send it to a lab and say, what's the origin of this bacteria? Is it human? Is it animal? Is it something else? And maybe if we come up with a pattern of measuring this taking these bacteria counts, we can home in on the source. And the source may be something we don't think it is. It might be in the bay. It might be north of us. It might be south of us. We just don't know. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But I think that we need some structured way to find out what's going on. Well, I think we owe it to our citizens, and we need to quit talking about it and do something.
Agree.
So what can we do?
I mean, Retro would be better at speaking to this, but I think we need to have not just Fly Creek, we have to have certain points
But
that we're always
all
testing.
points along the bay.
Right.
But I think the first step is trying to maybe even identify the origin. If we can identify the origin of this, and I hope I'm right that scientifically they can say what the source of it is, or not the source.
We've been taking samples from different watersheds at rain events, and
He's been doing
this is not to find the origin of the bacteria, but it is to look at different watersheds and different bacterial levels to see if there's an opportunity to look further up into that watershed for potential sewer overflows. One of the reasons we want to create a crew specifically to focus on that, so that when it's dry they can smoke test, when it's wet they can be looking around at what manholes have a lot of water in them, and they can learn the system better. Johnny Keller's who we're hoping to manage that crew with and give them the resources and the freedom to focus strictly on that. But anyway.
But we don't know that it's, if it's from sewer, we don't know what the origin is. It may not be that. And what really bothered me was reading those high bacteria levels when we hadn't even had any rain, basically, to speak of in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and that's all relative because Tim had taken samples too, and the last samples he got during dry events were in the 400 count range in about 2 or 3 of the watersheds.
Could it be just due to heat and, like you have an algae explosion, if you don't have any rain, you have a lot of heat, and can you have a bacteria explosion?
Yeah,
Explains it.
well, so 400 during a dry event, but when we've taken them during rain events, we're getting upwards of 10, 12,000. So there's still a significant difference after a rain event, or during a rain event. We still need to look upstream as to what's causing it. And I mean, we've got documented overflows too that we're trying to address those basins independently anyway. But the other thing we're doing is we met with ADEM and representatives of EPA, and they're trying to develop tests just exactly like you described to go through and find the DNA and the origin of these sources. So we're looking to target watersheds that don't have much wastewater collection in them at all, and look at where, if they're looking at cattle, or if they're looking at, other agricultural type facilities that house other.
So are they doing that
warm-blooded
systematically, or do we need to take action to request it, or do we need to take action to pay for that? Or are we just are they just doing it at their leisure? What can we do to
We're working with them to target the watersheds and then develop the protocols to run the tests that they're looking for both dry weather and wet weather flows. So we're working with them on that now.
Does it require anything from this council? Because there's a lot of impatient people, and I don't blame them.
Just the support to continue to do what we're doing. We'd love that.
Okay.
The crews, you're talking about smoke test and to ride around and check for overflows during a rain event, are those in your budget?
Yes, sir. And that's part of the engineering department too now. I mean, it all kind of works together. We're talking about increasing the SCADA system. We're talking about improving the mapping system. We're talking about doing a lot of things to help document and support this work effort. I mean, and it's a lot of work. I mean, there's nothing. We got 90 miles of gravity sewer system from. If you go south to, I guess you'd be looking at the other side, Paddock Estates. If you go north up to where Scenic 98 and 104 come together, and you go out to Greeno Road, I mean, you're looking at evaluating all of those areas that are part of the older part of Fairhope that have these older vitrified clay sewer lines that I mean, just need to be identified and assessed and looked at.
If we can find a way to focus on an area, get some answers for an area, and give people some confidence that we're finding out the cause of this.
Yes.
I mean, during a dry event or a rain event, I think it would go a long way towards instilling some confidence in our
Certainly.
people that we care about the environment. And
That's
and if it takes
exactly
a systematic, I don't know if I'm looking for a plan. I mean, you're telling me, and I hear you, and I believe you, but when I get asked the question, if I tell them we have a plan, what is the plan? They want to know what it is. And if I say the EPA is looking at it, they want when we're going to have some answers. So if we can get, I mean, even if it's you talking to reps.
The EPA protocol that we're following is parallel to what we're trying to do anyway internally.
So is there a time frame you can give us that we could tell people by X date we ought to know more?
There are no quick fixes to this.
I don't want to fix. I want to know. I'm talking about answers. And we got to identify, and then if we can fix it, may be something we can't fix. If you find out it's not.
I wouldn't go that far, but
well, then that assumes you know what the cause is.
Evaluate a watershed, and as you fix the issues that you find during that evaluation, then you're going to find cleanouts that get run over by cars. You're going to find manholes that get shifted off the frame and cover. It's a continuous. It's just a continuous process. But when you have all the leaks, to deal with today, and you find the low-hanging fruit and you fix those, then those leaks don't overwhelm the system.
You're describing the wet situation to
yes,
me, though. I'm thinking
correct.
Of the dry situation is really hard to explain.
Well, most of the gullies in the watershed don't have a whole lot of water coming out of them when it's dry.
Yeah, so then maybe it's coming from the bay. Maybe it's just some natural occurrence in the bay that we're getting all upset about, and we can tell people that, man, this origin is in the middle of the bay or from the other side of the bay. I don't
know where they took the samples that you're describing during dry weather, if they took them in the bay or if they took them in the watersheds. But
I think they were in the watershed, weren't they?
I know with the Big
the
Mouth
swimming,
Gully, there is some flow coming out of
and
Big
stuff like
Mouth
that.
through Springs, but
well, what about along Magnolia Beach area and, people that want to swim in the creek? And, that was a week or so ago, and we hadn't had any rain, and there were very, very high bacteria
I think
levels
the ones that Tim took at Fly Creek were single-digit numbers in that case. And I don't think anything in Fly Creek even came close to an elevation that would be a swim advisory level. I think the Tatumville Gully, however.
Mayor, are you remembering that differently?
I do think the Tatumville Gully result was a little higher than the swim advisory level.
There were some numbers that were
in Fly Creek.
Fly Creek, I thought they were well above swim advisory,
not what Tim took, but what Mobile Baykeepers posted.
But you're talking about after the spill.
I'm talking I'm
Okay.
talking like a week ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody posted those
And I haven't
numbers.
seen
that
their numbers.
Mobile Baykeepers
Right.
measured it. I want to say it was in Fly Creek, and it was a high multiple of the safe swimming level.
Well, one of the things we need to look at also in our utilities is having stormwater built into part of the utilities, because there's just so many things we have to do as a city, like these things, and studying our watersheds, building models of our watersheds, and those things would have to be paid for.
Yep.
And so I think it's something that we might look to propose.
Oh,
as part of the
I mean,
utilities.
there's no end to the amount of money that we could find to spend, but I mean, that we
No,
could
these
find
are
things to
things
spend it on.
that to solve what you're talking about. These are things that you have to have these things to come up with the answers. And this would also be for the, future development
And
too.
during dry weather flows for high levels of bacterial counts, I mean, that there is a potential for you hook a sanitary line from a building into a storm drain. So you will potentially get.
I mean, I need to give you some specifics, because there are, in these instances where it was dry and these bacteria counts were really, really high, it seems like we could tell Mobile Baykeeper, okay, you took that bacteria count and it was unsafe for swimming. What do we need to do to test that to find out what the origin of that bacteria was? Because if we find out it was cattle, and it has been that before, then that we know. If we find out it's
I think
birds,
you want to find that result, and I think you want to go upstream and look for where that same elevated count exists. I mean, it could be septic tanks leaching into the creek too. But
I'm saying
having septic tanks leach into the stormwater and finding it's human-related DNA is not going to help us determine whether it's from the sewer or from other issues. I want to take care of what we know we have, which is a sewer system in some of these watersheds. I really don't care that much about what the origin of some of that matter is, really, because if we're doing everything we can to protect what we have, then we really can't do anything else.
The origin of that matter goes back to solving the problem, though, because it may be a problem you can't solve. If we're trying to solve, in some cases.
And that's true. But I'd rather know that we've done everything we can with what we do contribute, if we contribute anything. And if it's still a problem, at least we've done everything we can to protect ourselves from being the cause of it. We're going to have to do it anyway. That's just my opinion.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Let's put our heads together and see what we can do.
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody else have anything? All right, let's adjourn, and we'll be back here. Let's get back here about 5 till 6 so we can start on time.